Welcome to the 71st reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. We are going to Canada. That was it. We were leaving, but to where? Australia positioned itself at the top of the list, but the country wasn't looking for immigrants anymore, and its distance from England seemed too far for even Brian's adventurous spirit. New Zealand the same, despite its attraction. America would have been okay, except for the Vietnam War. I'm not going all that way to get called up to fight in a war I don't believe in, Brian said. So Canada, a vast, diverse country that stretched from sea to sea, called out to us. A job came up with a consulting firm in Vancouver, British Columbia. They were desperate for geological engineers, and when we realized Vancouver's scenic beauty, we were eager to go. We broke the news to our families, keeping it as upbeat as possible. We're going on a 2-year adventure, we cheerfully announced, as if that made it easier for them to accept. I knew the decision was ripping my mother's heart to pieces. In a letter to me after Karen's birth, she had written, "Bother the old house, dear. Repairs were being done to it. I cannot think of anything these days but little Karen, you, and dear old Brian." We were everything to her, despite the differences between us at times. Brian's parents must have been suffering too, as I received a visit from them. Surprised by their impromptu arrival on my doorstep, I blurted out, "Brian's not here. He won't be home until the evening." "That's all right," they said with stern faces. "We've come to see you." No friendly social visit, I soon discovered. I took their coats and offered them tea, but they refused any refreshments. They wasted no time in stating why they had come. "We've come to ask a favor of you." "What favor?" "We want you to give up this idea of going to Canada." "What do you mean? It's not up to me." "Oh, yes, it is. It's your decision to want to go." "It's not anything to do with me. Brian's the one who suggested it. He wants to go. He says it's the best thing for us." "We don't believe you. We know you plotted it all. We want you to tell Brian that you don't want to go. That's all we're asking. We're begging you to do this for us." "I can't do anything to stop it," I cried. But they didn't believe me. They angrily accused me of taking their son away from them. My in-laws were two desperate people who had jumped to the wrong conclusion. After they'd gone, I was distraught. What if I'd told them it was all their fault we were going to Canada? That if they'd lent their son the money he asked for, we wouldn't have to leave? I couldn't believe it hadn't crossed their minds, but maybe they thought staying in London was my idea too, and that's why they wouldn't lend us the money. When Brian came home, I filled him in on their visit and their accusation against me. I wanted him to rant and rave and write to them, telling them they'd got it all wrong. But he said to let it go. He didn't want to confront them and said they would believe what they wanted to believe. It wouldn't help to have a huge debate that would turn into a row. He deplored conflict. He knew they were the primary reason for us leaving, but said that facing them with the truth would hurt them too much. Maybe there existed some stubbornness and pride on Brian's part too. It must have been difficult for him to realize his loving parents were selfish. In their effort to keep him all to themselves, they'd pushed him farther away than they ever imagined. I failed to see, though, why I should have to be the one held responsible for their loss. Even before I knew the extent to which they would alienate me, their attitude towards me in general only made it easier for me to accept leaving England. I couldn't wait to be away from their petty judgments and criticisms. We had so much to do in preparation for our move that I put all that aside and plunged into the tasks. We went to Canada House and successfully applied for landed immigrant status. Then we picked up our passports and received our smallpox vaccinations. The Canadian Consulting Company paid for our airfare and the cost of shipping our possessions by sea to Vancouver. They set a limit, though, so we had to sift through everything with a representative from the shipping company and decide what to choose. Only a few items of furniture passed the test, plus personal belongings. No electrical appliances because of the difference in voltage, except for my Singer sewing machine, which I insisted on taking. We were told we could get a new motor put on it when we reached Vancouver. The gas cooker and our little fridge were sold, and it saddened me to see our carefully collected items treated like so many odd lots in an auction house. Despite what the representative said, I wasn't so sure they could all be easily replaced once we reached our destination. We travelled around visiting friends to say our goodbyes. A friend advised Brian to buy a car and learn to drive before moving to Canada because everyone there drove. He bought a second-hand black Austin estate car with a posh wood trim, and it was so convenient to drive places instead of waiting for buses and trains. A visit to one of Brian's university friends took us southeast to the countryside of Kent. After an enjoyable supper with the family, we went for a stroll. I became intoxicated with the rolling hills, the trees, the little straggling fences, the grass and wildflowers. A sadness crept over me, and I wanted to say to Brian, "Let's not go. Let's find a way to stay here, where we belong." But I said nothing. No point. Much too late. We were already on our way. Because our flight wasn't until January 15th and everything had either been sold, given away, or packed up, we had to find somewhere to live for 6 weeks. The reasonable choice was Colchester, where we could spend the remaining time with our families. We assumed we would stay at Charnwood with Brian's parents, as they had a spare room, central heating, inside lavatory, separate bathroom, running hot water in the kitchen, plus the luxury of carpets on the floors. Mum had none of those comforts in her house, and December was cold, with an unusual amount of heavy snow. Karen reacted badly to her smallpox vaccination, the entire left side of her tiny body swollen and bright red in colour, miserable. The doctor could do nothing for her. Hopefully the swelling would disappear by the time we boarded the plane. Things continued on a downward spiral. Brian's parents refused to let Karen or me stay in their house. They only wanted Brian. I asked Mum if Karen and I could stay with her and David. She wasn't prepared for that and wanted to know why we weren't staying with Oliver and Kay. Their house was much more suitable than hers. When I told her they refused to have us, she exploded and called them every name in the book. Relations had never been great between Brian's parents and my mother. We'd tried several times to get them together, but nothing worked. Mum thought Brian's parents snobbish and too high and mighty for her, although she did get on a little better with Brian's dad. Oliver and Kay thought Edna a little too low down on the social ladder for them, although they hadn't said so, only insinuated. This last blow was too much, though. Brian tried to reason with his mum to change her mind so we could be together, but she wouldn't give in. No question of him staying at Wickham Road, as that would hurt his parents, so he chose them over us. He claimed to be torn between his wife and child and his parents, but he would be spending the rest of his life with us, whereas he had only 6 more weeks with them. He'd come and visit us, and we'd get through it, meaning I'd get through it, and Karen. So Karen and I landed up on Mum's doorstep, loaded down with as much as we'd been able to stash in the car. I foolishly dumped on Mum all the odds and ends from my kitchen, things I didn't want to throw out, but things she didn't want and had no room for. This put her instantly in a bad mood. Those 6 weeks were more miserable than I could ever have imagined. We were constantly cold. In the unheated bedroom, Karen wore her dressing gown to bed over her pajamas, socks on her feet, and still most nights she cried with the cold. The nappy situation was most trying. Karen had diarrhea. I invested in disposables called paddy pads, but they were inferior to the streamlined versions available today. They leaked, and I had no hot water on tap with which to wash Karen or her clothes. No handy baby wet wipes either. They hadn't been invented. Water had to be heated up in a kettle and poured into a bowl set on the table for washing purposes. Mum complained about the growing pile of smelly nappies in the dustbin outside and claimed the dustman might refuse to pick them up. Then she'd be in trouble. Of course, it would all be my fault. We argued about everything. David, fortunately out at work all day, rarely intervened in our disputes, although it must have been difficult for him. He didn't come home each day to peace, but to war. Brian came periodically to pick us up and take us to Charnwood, where he appeared to be well looked after. The central heating turned up so high we had to shed most of the layers of clothing we wore at Mum's place. Christmas arrived. No happier than the year before. Both families showered Karen with stuffed toys and a pretense of celebration. Tension filled the air, though, for we were leaving very soon, yet no mention was made of the great adventure. Then Karen became sick with bronchitis. Still battling her reaction to the smallpox vaccination, she weakened, barely able to keep food down. She coughed all night long, keeping herself and all in the house awake. I couldn't keep her warm, and seeing her so miserable, I broke down and asked Brian if we could possibly move to Charnwood until her health improved. I worried about the long flight ahead and how we would manage it with a sick baby. His parents refused to have us. In desperation, I told Brian I would let Karen go with him so she could be in a warmer environment. They surely wouldn't refuse to help their own sick granddaughter, no matter their antagonism towards me. Wrong. Their response to Brian's request: Karen is Jenny's baby. Let her look after her. So Karen and I stayed at Wickham Road, suffering sleepless nights and unbearable days. I counted down the days, hours, minutes and seconds until I could walk out of both families' lives forever. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.